Listen up, real estate investors, entrepreneurs, and agents. You're in the right place. Unlocking the secrets to real estate investing and entrepreneurship. Welcome to the Titanium Vault, hosted by RJ Bates III. Here's RJ.
Hello and welcome to the Titanium Vault. I'm your host, RJ Bates. Today we're sitting down with Mike Wagner. Mike, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, RJ. How are you?
Doing fantastic, man. So today is episode number 45. We're quickly approaching our 1-year anniversary. So I appreciate you sitting down and taking the time to share your story with us. Why don't you take a second to introduce yourself and tell us what it is you do in real estate investing?
Yeah, absolutely. And first, I want to thank you for having me on. I always love the opportunity to talk shop with like-minded folks. I've been investing in real estate, I guess makes me feel old, but just over 11 years now. Way back when in 2007, I was working my day job as a physical therapist, and I enjoyed the day-to-day stuff, but also knew that there had to be something more to this life aside from punching a clock and slogging away day after day. So I created this plan to acquire 100 apartments that each made me $100 a month. And at the time, the age of 24, that sounded like an awesome life to me. And parts of it are still very appealing to me. But essentially, I set out to accomplish that goal in the evenings and weekends. And 2007, I bought my first duplex. Your typical midnight guru special, no money down, seller financing. I fixed it up, put some tenants in it, and went back to the bank and refinanced, pulled my investment out, a little extra profits, and hung on to it for the cash flow. And then I rinsed and repeated that several times over the next 4 years. And at one point in about 2010, 2011, I realized I kind of recalculated, and I realized things didn't work out quite as well in the real world as I had in my head. And so my new plan was going to be 150 apartments. And because it took me 3 or 4 years to get up to 31, I got a little discouraged and thought, well, listen, I can't do this again for another 10 years before I have enough income to get out of my day job. So something's got to change. And I'll spare you the personal story, but I was on vacation with my wife in Costa Rica, and I had this epiphany that I was just fed up of people telling me how often and how long I could be on vacation for. And so on the beach there in paradise, I decided as soon as I get home, I'm changing something. And if I'm being honest with you, I got home and I kind of went nuts. I dove into everything I could to accelerate my escape from the rat race, and that's when I stumbled on self-storage. And really, I haven't looked back since. I quit my job the day before I closed on my first storage facility back in 2011, and we've since transitioned all of our energy into buying underperforming self-storage facilities and getting them turned around.
Awesome. So the multifamily that you were taking down before then, did you sell all those and liquidate it, or do you still own those?
I hung on to them for a while because they were all making me money, so I wasn't in a fire sale situation, and I needed the income they were generating as because I had quit my day job and lost all of that income. And the first storage facility I bought was actually losing $2,000 a month when I took over. So I wasn't really in a position to liquidate anything else that was making me money at the time. So I hung on to them. I'm thinking it was probably 2015 or so. Once I really saw the writing on the wall that storage was what I wanted to do. I started to liquidate some of the properties, and then that really accelerated in the past 18 months or so. I've since sold off all of my residential apartments.
Okay. So let's talk about self-storage, and what about that strategy drew you to it and made you make that leap of faith and leave your career and make that the sole strategy that you're going to utilize in real estate investing?
That's an excellent question, and there's a lot to unpack there, but generally speaking, I knew that I could take what I had learned in residential real estate and apply it to the renting of garages. The underlying concepts are all the same. All you're doing is owning real estate and renting of it at a rate that exceeds your cost to own and operate. But it had a lot of advantages. I had a lot of challenges with residential apartments just from and these are potentially shortcomings of myself. I know there are a lot of people that do it very successfully, but there were so many things that caused my blood pressure to elevate beyond healthy levels, chasing people for rents and dealing with late night repair calls and all those sorts of things. So storage offered me an opportunity to take what I learned, but it eliminated a lot of the headaches. Nobody lives in storage units, so I don't have to worry about evictions. They're made of concrete floors and metal walls, roofs, and doors, so repairs are much fewer and far between. And then you look at the underlying financials, and they're just, simply put, stronger from a income to expense ratio. When we look at storage, typically speaking, our operating expenses are going to be in the 30% range. So for every dollar we bring in rent, we're going to spend 30% of that on our operating expenses, and that's far more favorable to the industry standards that you see in multifamily. And so we saw that. We looked at the default rates on storage relative to basically every other asset, real estate, mortgage-backed asset on the planet, and saw that storage facilities default less often than anything else. So we knew there had to be something in there that we liked. And ultimately what it came down to is I found a deal where I was able to answer with a very high level of confidence a couple key questions, and those are what's wrong with this facility, right? We and I should back up and tell you, we chase facilities that are underperforming and therefore undervalued. I'm not interested in curb appeal and pride of ownership and turnkey or anything like that when it comes to storage. We want 40, 50, 60% occupied. And so when we find those deals, we, one, as I said, identify what's broken here. And if we can identify what's broken, the obvious second question is, can I fix it? And there are some things we can fix, neglectful management, somebody inherited it, so they just have no idea what they're doing, or, there's all sorts of things that could be broken, expenses that are out of whack, all those types of things. And of course, there's other things we can't fix. If it's in the middle of Flint, Michigan, and
right,
there's a mass exodus of folks from the market, and there's just too much storage and not enough people, clearly we can't fix that, and we're going to keep looking. But when we found this deal, it was very evident to me that it was a case of mismanagement, and I was very confident that we could fix what was broken, and essentially I was confident we could double the value of the property, and I knew it would take 2 to 3 years, and I was comfortable with that. As it turns out, we actually doubled the value in under 9 months.
There you go. So yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, I'm by no means an expert when it comes to self-storage, but I've dabbled in it a little bit. And the main thing that I've, taken away from the analysis of self-storage is that you want to find one that's underperforming, but you want to find the core reason why it's underperforming is something that you can change. Like you said, really location is important. You want to make sure that there's a need for self-storage in that location, and that's the reason why it has a low or a high vacancy. and not it's hopefully it's because of poor management, or like you said, someone inherited it and they just don't know what to do with it, but not because it's in a bad location, correct?
That's exactly right. I'm well aware of my limitations when it comes to fixing the unfixable, and
Right.
an oversaturated market is not something that we can fix, or a location that's just. It may be that the market's not oversaturated, but from a geographic standpoint, the facility has a strategic disadvantage, meaning it might just be half a mile further than a top-notch competitor who's on top of his game, and it's very hard to get someone to drive past a relatively decent run facility to come to your place without getting involved in a race to the bottom and a commodity pricing war, which is not something as an investor you're ever looking to do.
Right. So what markets are you in? And because of your ability to run these at a low overhead and there's not really a whole lot of hands-on management, are you able to expand to other markets pretty easily to find just a solid deal compared to I only find deals in this very specific market?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I'll answer the first part by saying I specifically like to focus in what are known as secondary and tertiary markets. So I don't want downtown or city center, the 3-story Class A type facilities. I much prefer to work in suburbia and even rural markets, and that's somewhat a personal preference. Also, I think there are some strategic advantages to doing that. The towns are oftentimes more favorable to expansion and that type of thing. And the second part of your question, I think you're touching on, can you do this remotely, or do you have to be in your
Right.
backyard to do it? And it's an excellent question. If you had asked me a year ago, I would have said, well, I own one an hour from home, and that's as far as I think I'd recommend. But I'm very happy to tell you that I've since discovered a incredibly efficient remote management structure. It's kind of me piecemealing 2 or 3 different vendors together, along with some boots on the ground that have really opened up a nationwide market for me now. I still only focus on secondary and tertiary markets, but our most recent project is over 1,100 miles from my house. I'm in New York, and it's down in northern Florida.
Awesome. So when you do that, when you go to a remote location, does your overhead increase slightly?
It doesn't, believe it or not, and I shouldn't say that. There's potential that it could, but it hasn't for me, and this might just be circumstantial and maybe coincidental, but the 3 pieces that come together for a remote management success are an online, not just presence, but rental portal, so that RJ, if you pulled into my storage facility down in Florida, there's a sign that would welcome you rather than a person. And it would say, hey, sorry we missed you. Jump online here at this website or call this number, and we're happy to help you move in right now. So we've got that online portal where people can rent and electronically sign an agreement as well as make payments. And then we've got a call center in place as the second piece of the puzzle where for folks that aren't interested in doing that online or not comfortable, they can call and speak with a person. And it's not a generic call center or specific to the storage industry. And so the customer service they offer is every bit as good as I could offer personally if I were answering the phones. The last piece of the puzzle, and I think this directly answers your question, is you do need boots on the ground. No matter how good those remote management structures are, there are people that are going to want to see a unit before they rent online, or you're going to need a lock cut or something to that extent. And you would think that would increase your operating expense, but in both of the facilities where I operate 100% remotely, we have living quarters on site and someone who lives on the property offering 24/7 security, and I give them a discounted rent in exchange for being available to do those boots on the ground tasks that I need every so often.
Okay, so that's pretty cool, and I think unique that I haven't heard somebody say that before. But That's kind of similar to the idea of like a smaller multifamily, complex. You can have a on-site manager that, lives on site that you give free rent to and things along those lines. So is that a strategy that you kind of took from your multifamily background, or is that something that you just kind of figured out in the self-storage game?
Yeah, I didn't, in my rental portfolio, I didn't have that type of setup. So it is new to me in the storage world. It's more common than you might think. A lot of facilities come with managers' quarters. I wouldn't pretend to know exactly what percentage, but
Right.
two of my three do. So take that for what it's worth.
There you
The point I want to make, though, is it's not necessary to have those living quarters on site for this strategy that I've developed to work. Before I had someone living on site at my most recent project, what I did is I contracted with my landscaping maintenance company, the gentleman who mows my lawn and takes care of the parking lot, cleans it up, and does all that stuff. I brought him on to do the kind of after hours calls for whatever might happen, and to do the routine tasks. Once every week, he walks around and makes sure that the units that are supposed to be empty are empty, and that there's, each unit that is empty is fully rentable, as opposed to having someone's trash that they left in it. So he can basically send me that lock audit, which we call it, and I can reconcile it with the online portal, and as long as everything matches up, then we're good to go.
Gotcha. So let's, for the people that are listening and they're like, this sounds great, let's talk about how you're financing these properties. You're going and you're buying something that's underperforming. So how are you taking it down when it's underperforming? And I'm assuming once you've stabilized it and you've got it up to the criteria that it needs to be at, then you're refinancing out with a more traditional means of financing. Is that correct?
Yeah, and what I'll do, if you don't mind, is I'll run through my last three deals because they kind of show a evolution of how I've been financing things.
Yeah, that'd be great.
The first one I purchased, we did, I was exiting the rental portfolio world, so I had some equity I could scrape together. We bought the property, total acquisition cost, including closing costs, was $350,000. So I scraped together $40,000 in equity of my own. I borrowed $60,000 from a private investor, and then I got a traditional bank loan for $250K to round out the purchase. And I'm not going to pretend that it was easy. I got 5 no's before I got a yes from a bank.
Right.
And a lot of their objections were, well, you're quitting the only job that's paying you any money right now, and 2, you don't have any experience in self-storage. So I really had to lean on my rental portfolio experience and convince folks that those skill sets would apply here. And then it was just persistence. 9 months later, we were full at that location, and we started to seek funds to refi. And that took even more trips into the bank because I didn't have the seasoning I needed to really have a strong case. But ultimately, we did get the appraisal at $750,000, and I was able to pull $500,000 to fund our first round of expansion. And we've done that a couple times since. So essentially, we used a combination of my equity in a rental portfolio as well as some private money in order to get started. And then we have transitioned into where we're strictly with a conventional loan product in place on that one.
Gotcha. And when you talk about expansion, are you actually developing additional units to the location that you bought?
That's exactly right. The first property I was just speaking about that we bought was 10,000 square feet when we bought it, and we're now at 30,000 with approvals for another 15,000 square feet.
And when you purchased that property and you did the original analysis, did you take into account the ability to develop on it and add those additional units? Was that always part of the plan, or was it kind of stair-stepped as you owned it?
Awesome question. My mentality as I go into any purchase, and this was even true on the first one, is it needs to make sense as it sits.
Right.
I don't pretend to be, to be able to see the future and know that existing demand will be there. I can certainly do projections based on the market conditions and that sort of thing, but I'm as far from a speculator as there is, I think. And so what I look at is, as it sits today, if I just fix what's broken, is it worth double? And if that answer is yes, then I also look to, okay, best case scenario, could we conceivably add more and fill it out? But I never use that as a deciding factor when I'm going to pull the trigger on a purchase.
Right. Yeah, when we've done analysis on these kind of deals, it's exactly what you're talking about. We analyze it as, is this a good purchase if we don't do any development at all? And are the numbers going to be able to cash flow? And are we going to be able to do the equity pull? And then we look at, okay, let's look at almost as like a second deal, the development side of things. And is there a need in the market? Because just because you have the ability or the size of a lot to do expansion does not mean that that market necessarily demands that you have that many storage units. So the last thing you want to do is take a 10,000 square foot complex and make it a 30,000 square foot complex, and there's not a need for 30,000 square feet of storage units. So that's the other part that we look at very, very closely. And it sounds like, especially with the markets that you're choosing, that's an important part of your analysis, is making sure that there is a need for the amount of storage units that you're going to have. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that fits very well with my investment strategy, especially now that I've transitioned to using more private investors for my purchases. It allows me to underpromise and overdeliver. When I put together, for example, on our most recent property, my investment projections were to stabilize the property over a 4-year period. And in order to do that, we needed to move in 2 people per month for 4 years. And that would take it from a $500,000 property all the way up to $1 million property, just about. And that was my promise to my investors. In the month of May alone, we had 20 net move-ins on this property. So we're a 10x as far as our projections go. And it's this, just as you were describing, if in this time period we're able to stabilize the existing 24,000 square feet, there are 2 acres there for expansion, but I didn't even tell the investors about that. They'll be very pleasantly surprised when they find out there's a second round of funding open to them in the future.
Right. And that's the amazing thing about this strategy, is that there's a way for you to acquire properties and make them great deals as is, but then you can develop on top of it and really, like you said, 10x your opportunities there. So moving forward, kind of where do you see your business going here in the future, and kind of, you've got this nationwide, or ability to take this nationwide. How are you like locating these deals and marketing for these deals, or do you have other people bringing them to you?
That's a good question, and my answer might differ from a lot of folks that might be in more of a growth phase than I am. I've got 2 young kids, and they're only young for so long, so I place a high value on spending my time home with them. So I'm only allowed, this is a self-imposed rule, to chase 1 facility at a time. Right now that one's in Florida, and in a year or so I may be ready for a next one, but I would never take on 2 at a time. So to answer your question about where this is going, we still have our marketing campaigns out there, and we direct mail to facilities that meet our criteria. And I'm also launching a training program where I basically partner with folks, helping them find deals, whether it's one I hand feed them or just coach them through the farming and acquisition purchase, and then the takeover and implementing my strategies. That's kind of where the future is going, is I'm going to be helping other people do what I've done with storage, and they'll be more of the doer, and I'll just lend what I've learned over the last 7 or 8 years to shorten their learning curve.
That's pretty cool. So on that, when is this program already rolled out, or is it going to be something that you're rolling out in the future?
It's something that I've done for people in my direct network before. It's not something that I've made open to the public, if you will, and I am literally this week starting the beta test for the website rollout and that sort of thing. So it's imminent, I'll say.
Gotcha. And when, say, you have a student and you walk them through the process and you find a deal for them, is this an ongoing joint venture agreement, or is it just a small fee that they pay you and then they have all of the equity?
Excellent question. And a way to structure it, my preferred way is what we do is we do have an upfront fee as well as a monthly fee, and that really just addresses, and I'm sure you have experienced this before, the fact that unless someone pays, they're not going to pay attention, right?
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I need skin in the game so that folks will do what we set out to do. I think far too often storage can be a shiny object for somebody, and they get real excited about it but don't fully commit. And so that upfront fee takes care of that part. And then there is a back end equity, a very minor equity stake that I take in only the first property that they buy.
Gotcha. So my last question before we kind of get around to your why is, are you noticing nowadays that the sellers of storage units understand that they have that shiny object that everybody kind of desires and are making the values of those properties, they inflate the values of those properties and want a higher price point than maybe, say, a couple of years ago?
That's an excellent question. And generally speaking, absolutely, the price of facilities has increased, and we're at or maybe just past a peak. And so we could be sliding down. I don't think it's going to be any sort of recession type, but we might be softening a little bit in the market. The big thing to remember about storage is that it's such a micro market industry that, to be honest with you, I don't care what's happening with nationwide trends. I bought a property 2 months ago, and people are always saying, well, it's such a seller's market, you can't buy right now, wait it out a couple years. I paid $19 per square foot for a facility that would have cost $35 a square foot plus land to buy at the quote unquote peak of a market. So the deals are definitely out there. This industry does have an overwhelming majority of the assets within it owned by mom and pops who don't have the level of sophistication that some other industries do. So the deals are out there. It's just a matter of putting in the work to find them.
Right. And the thing that I've noticed is just in the very small amount of conversations that I've had with those, quote unquote mom and pop shops, is they don't really understand how to keep track of their numbers. They don't have very strong books on them, and they don't even really know how to analyze the deal that they already own. They don't know if they have a good deal or not. They just know right now more money's coming into the bank account than's going out, and so that must mean we have a good property or a good setup going on. And that's kind of shocking and surprising, but I guess not. I guess it's no different than just a single family landlord. A lot of times they don't fully understand how to analyze their deals or not either. So it's a very interesting kind of small niche in the real estate investing world. So let's talk about your why. So you've left your career, you're starting, now you're building up your portfolio, you're starting your education program. What is the reason why you do all this, and what's your why?
Yeah, absolutely. And beyond a shadow of a doubt, my why is my family, my wife and kids, and I just feel so blessed to have stumbled on and figured out this storage thing. It's enabled me to have what most folks would describe as an incredible life. Our bills are paid and our needs are met, and we live relatively modestly, but we travel 60 to 90 days a year. We drive an RV across country. We fly to Florida 3 or 4 times. We've hit every national park. And to me, life is just too short to slog away day after day, 40, 50, 60 hours a week in hopes of maybe someday retiring. And so my big why right now is not only to continue to embody that lifestyle and show my kids that there's a better way to live than what society would have you believe, but also to help other people understand that and introduce them to the idea. Because I, at risk of sounding cliche, it's incredibly sad that the normal life is one where you don't have control over your time and you have to, quote unquote, vacate it with a vacation in order to feel free. I believe we should feel free the vast majority of the time rather than for 2 to 3 weeks a year. Right.
I completely agree. That's why I'm doing the bucket list that I'm doing on Facebook. Every day I'm announcing something new that I want to have on my bucket list, kind of remind myself of the reasons why I work so hard within my company, but also to kind of remind myself that, every now and then you need to enjoy the life that you're currently living. Don't always work on creating the life that you want to live, but actually just live it. Because I think we can get lost inside our businesses and constantly wanting to grow. So, it's amazing. I had Steve Kavanaugh in here. He's your buddy. That's how you kind of found out about this podcast. And so the past 2 episodes, it's inspiring to me to have people on here that are creating businesses that are enabling them to live the life that they want to live, compared to, the business always controlling their life. It's, they're living the life that they want. So that's very inspirational, and I appreciate you sharing that. For the listeners out there that want to contact you and get in touch with you, or maybe even talk to you about coming on board with your coaching program, what's the best way they can reach you?
Yeah, if they want to find out a little more info, they can jump on Facebook. We're at Storage Rebellion on Facebook, and then my website is thestoragerebellion.com, and that's definitely the best. Those are the 2 best ways to get a hold of me.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for reaching out to me, and I always think it's awesome that I have a guest on here that heard somebody else that was on the show, and then they're like, hey, I've got something to bring to the table. You're the first guest on here that's talked about self-storage and buying and owning storage units, so I appreciate you bringing that knowledge and that niche to the real estate investing market, and wish you the best of luck with your new coaching program, and continue building that portfolio to live the life that you truly want to live.
Awesome. Well, I was happy to be on. Thanks so much, RJ.
All right, Mike. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks so much for listening to the Titanium Vault with your host, RJ Bates III. For more info and to stay up to date, visit www.podcast.thetitaniumvault.com and on facebook.com/The Titanium Vault. If you enjoyed the episode, please rate and review, and we'll catch you next time on the Titanium Vault.